Good evening. It's a pleasure to see you all here. Thank you for coming out. I heard that you had a center here, so I said I should offer to go and speak and visit the friends there. Now that's a normal kind of thing for me, but it's a very special one because I hail from here. I went pioneering from Newport Heights, and I had regular study classes in Costa Mesa. And with the Merkoviches at that time, but that was the solid family that was here at that time. And their son became a Baha'i, was becoming a Baha'i and needed to study the dispensation and the will and testament, because in those days you couldn't get in the faith without doing that. So we had classes, we had special classes. And I well remember the area. I was living here where the news came of the passing of the beloved guardian. You know, Ryokanum first sent out a message that the guardian was desperately ill following Asiatic flu. And I looked at that message and I opened my dictionary. And desperately ill, it said meant beyond all hope. And I said, he's dead. And then the cable came. An hour later, she sent another cable saying that he'd passed away. That was a terrific jolt to the Baha'i world, a loss. And we were all just overwhelmed with grief, just because it was such a surprise also. Some of the friends were able to organize and go to the funeral in London. And all of the hands of the cause who were serving, of course, as the aides, the immediate helpers of Shoghi Effendi, gathered there, had their first meetings after his passing, and then went to the Holy Land and had their first conclave, their first meeting to decide on what, first of all, to search for any will or any indication of Shoghi Effendi, what was going to happen after his passing, and then to determine the course of the faith for the coming 5 years. Initially they decided, because we had the guidance of the 10-year crusade. The Guardian's goals and everything were all before the Baha'i world, and there they were. So the hands of the cause said, let us accomplish that, and then as we're doing that, we'll see what else we do. And then in 1961, they called for the election, a stage in the development of the International Baha'i Council was to become an elected body. So we had a kind of a rehearsal for the election of the Universal House of Justice, and all the NSAs of the world took part in that, and we elected an international council. And that council, at that time, it had a number of Hands of the Cause as members, and the Hands of the Cause then withdrew from membership to do their own work and service as Hands of the Cause. And that meant that there were a number of new people elected internationally to that body. The 5 men that were on the International Council were almost automatically elected to the House of Justice, because they'd had a couple years of experience already there in the Holy Land. And then the others, I had the good fortune to attend that first convention. By that time, I was a pioneer in Nicaragua and a member of the National Spiritual Assembly there. And it was this very exciting moment to go to the Master's house with all the members of the NSAs that had been able to gather in the Holy Land and cast our votes for the first Universal House of Justice. They had organized everything very carefully. Women were in charge of everything, so we wouldn't see any man that might stand out, or if we thought, oh, he said a prayer, or he must be spiritual or something. Wasn't anything like that. All women said prayers, and Rhea Khanum chaired the opening session. Then, of course, after the voting took place, some of the members of the council and other Hands of the Cause took part. Even the Hands of the Cause stayed out of sight of the delegates until the hour of the election, they had a special wing, like a room, and they were all there, but it was only after the voting that we could go and greet them and mix with them. So exciting. I got there a little late the first day, and I went with other delegates to the shrine when the shrines were open, and went as a delegate to the Shrine of the Bob the first time. Thrilling experience, and I was completely engrossed in prayer. And when I opened my eyes, the shrine was empty. I thought, I stayed too late. I don't know. I got up and started backing out, and when I got to the door opened, and Rhea Khanum was there. And she said, who are you? I was like, what am I doing in the shrine all alone? And I said, I'm Hooper Dunbar. You don't know how I regretted that I said that way. I said, what is she supposed to know? I'm Hooper Dunbar. How about, my name is Hooper Dunbar? That would have been better. Anyway, these embarrassing moments when you meet the hands of the God is part of the business of the faith, I think. She said, oh, are you? Like, I'm glad you know who you are, She says, well, you're here. Yes. You'll have to help. Will you help? Of course. And then as we went out of the shrine door, there were piles of roses with stemmed roses all along the front of the shrine, about that deep, and they all had to go inside. And she said, Shoghi Effendi instructed me in 1944, at the centenary of the founding of the faith, for the holy day, to decorate the inner threshold with a design made from rose heads, just the rose itself without the stem. And we're going to carpet the inner shrine now with those things. So if you help us get the roses to the threshold, then we'll go on with the rest of the work. Like, you're not going in the threshold, but and so that took a little while, and when carrying in the last bunch of roses, I came out, she said to me, thank you so much, and she said, open your hands, and I opened my hands, and she filled them with dry rose petals from the threshold itself. So I hadn't met Rhea Khanum before that, but she knew about me because I was teaching in a remote Indian area in Nicaragua. And she was always interested in indigenous peoples, as you may have heard. So that was my first encounter with her and my first service with her. As a member of the teaching center, we had 15 years together on the teaching center prior to my election to the House of Justice in 1988. And it was 1988 until 2010, 22 years, that I had the great honor and privilege of serving with the dear members of the House of Justice and watching all the activities and movements of the Baha'i world. Was as thrilling in the opposite direction to come off of the House of Justice and suddenly be a Baha'i and the rank and file of the Baha'is, and all the news that you were constantly privileged to hear, you didn't hear anymore. So I started digging back into the writings. I said, I've got to do something to keep myself inspired here. And I began some more writing and special studies of the faith. Now, we're living in a very special time. We are pioneering, if you will, a new culture that the House of Justice has referred to as a new culture, new patterns of community life, new established activities with the foundation activities of each of the Baha'i communities. We're learning things. We are very centered on the House of Justice messages and their guidance, which is of course, appropriate. But in moving around the Baha'i world, I find that myself, this is just my own these are all my personal observations. I mean, obviously, I don't have any authority of any sort, but I have had some experience. And there seems to have been a certain distancing of ourselves from the deepening in the sacred text, in the revelation itself. With our enthusiasm with the Institute courses, which is quite appropriate, and there are, of course, quotations in those, but the major texts of the faith, although the Ruhi books themselves say you should have a study plan to study the sacred texts of the faith for your personal study, if nothing else. But there was kind of an idea we shouldn't have study classes on the sacred texts. And then Firesides disappeared along the way, too. Now, I remember sitting in the House of Justice getting a letter from the NSA of the United States that said, "Did you say there shouldn't be firesides?" And the House wrote back and said, "We've never said that. How could we say that? How could the House of Justice say that? The Guardian had said it was the prime way to attract people to the cause." But somehow it was an established pattern already, based mainly on an understanding of individual Baha'is, that by having said you must concentrate on the goals of as given by the House of Justice, which supplemented the original goals of the study of the faith and the implementation of the divine plan and all those things that were understood by the House of Justice to already be firmly established. So we were elaborating something additional to it, not erasing the past. But it's been a challenge I think, for the Baha'is, in many places that I've been hearing the same thing, that many of the new friends that have come are not aware. Even your Secretary of the National Assembly told me he spoke to a large group of Baha'is in both the east and west of the countries, youth, and he asked them, "How many of you have read The Advent of Divine Justice?" Which, as you recall, any of you that have been Baha'is for a while, you know that was considered to be the Bible of teaching. Shoghi Effendi's mandate to us in such marvelous details. And he said, nobody raised their hands. Several hundred Baha'is, both ends of the country. Well, the House of Justice and the National Assembly members, I think 4 of them, went to Haifa and sat with members of the House of Justice and talked about this whole thing, and were very frank about the whole situation of what was going on. And I saw the House of Justice. I was there on a short visit a year and a half ago, and I had the honor and pleasure of meeting with the House itself. And they said, we've mentioned the word firesides more often in the last 6 months than in the previous 30 years. And there's no hesitation about it. Let the friends go forward with everything they can, with study classes, with the institute process, with firesides, and teach the faith of God to new people. Because as much as we have tried to focus on the idea of preparing ourselves for mass enrollment, for entry by troops, there hasn't been a whole lot of it. I think you know that. Now we've got some guests tonight, I understand, that are in the process of learning about the faith. It's wonderful. You'll see what a miraculous thing it is. And I hope that we will all perhaps consider, just as a suggestion to you, that we renew our own understanding of the covenant we have with Baha'u'llah, that we're obeying the House of Justice because Baha'u'llah came, not because it's an end in itself. We must always remember that. So our obedience to everything, our adherence to the covenant, comes from absorbing Baha'u'llah's teachings and putting them in action in ourselves. Baha'u'llah commands all of us to teach the faith. He lays the duty of spreading the cause of God. He has forbidden clergy. He's prohibited clergy in the Baha'i faith. So who's going to teach the faith? In the past, the clergy did. Not always a good job, but they did, they did their part. Now, it's to us, but then each one according to their ability and capacity. But he says, before all else, you must teach the cause of God to your own self. Teach the cause to the point where you begin to live according to the teachings of the faith. He said, when you transform your own character, then after that your words will take effect in the hearts of the listeners. Otherwise, he says, nothing will happen. I don't think he says those exact words, but he says the equivalent. There will be no effect whatever. That's pretty much. So sometimes when I hear the Baha'is, sometimes we say, oh, it's so hard to teach. I try to teach, but nobody's interested. And I think to myself, probably we're not interested enough. We're not rooted in it enough. We're not centered in it enough. It's not the burning reason that we're alive. And friends, if you look around you, as you know, in this world, we really need the Baha'is to be focusing on what Baha'u'llah is asking us to do and carrying out the guidance of the House of Justice. And that means that teaching has to become the burning issue of our life. From the time we open our eyes in the morning, as Mr. Sears used to say, we should pray, oh, Baha'u'llah, let me find waiting souls today. Once in a while we've all, in our lives perhaps, run across a waiting soul. Somebody that's waiting to hear about the faith. Somebody that actually looks at us and says, where have you been? Why haven't you told me about this before? Why are you hiding this? You feel like, well, we're not trying to hide it, but if that's the impression you have, take it up yourself now. Do something with it. The Guardian had said orally with the pilgrims that about 2% of the population are ready and waiting to hear about the faith and will respond immediately. That's a small percentage. But with a big population, it's a whole lot more than we've got. And if we find those people, then he's promised that one soul that really understands the faith and has breathed the life of the teachings is able to change a whole country, can cause a continent to change. Such a power that Baha'u'llah is ready to channel through those that center themselves in the love of God and in this desire to carry forward the mission of Baha'u'llah. The mission of Baha'u'llah lasts a certain number of years, some 70-some years, and then it's over. So the master has carried on in a grand style and carried it into the West and so on. But who's to do it now? This is the divine plan that Abdu'l-Baha gave to particularly centered on the North American believers. Although all the other countries are auxiliaries, the principal responsible parties are the Baha'is living in America to carry out the divine plan. So also, if there's a challenge to the faith right now to go back to your roots and to arise in a new spirit, especially in this bicentennial period that we're in, which we see the receptivity and people ready to come out and all kinds of excitement about the gatherings that we had for the anniversaries. It's a very special time. So I think we should take hope and we should try to deepen ourselves with regard to placing our trust in Baha'u'llah. And study very carefully the writings with respect to not involving ourselves in political contentions. One of the reasons that Baha'is want to solve the problems of the world by politics is that they don't know the Baha'i teachings yet. The Baha'i teachings solve the problems of the world, not politics. Politics is not going to solve it. It's just driving us into further divisions in the world and divisiveness and upset amongst ourselves. So we really have to be supranational, he says, Shoghi Effendi says, this interesting word, supranational in our vision, the way we see things. It's all right to be patriotic. I love my country. I'm happy that I was born here, whatever. But we need to express things at an international level, our comments. And Shoghi Effendi, in writing to the committee of the guides for the temple, that would guide the public in the temple, said that above all, they should never mention political figures or political parties. Never let those words come out of their mouth. If they're asked directly about it, they say that our attention is focused at the international level. We believe the solution of the problems of the world has to be solved internationally with the accord of all of the countries of the world. And we don't enter into divisive political feuds and local issues that are not ultimately going to solve the problems of the world. Well, such a sound advice. Communicating that to the Baha'is in Chile too. Recently I was there. They've had such an exciting first year. I had the good fortune to be at the dedication itself. And I went back now, and the first year I was there with the architect because we had a close collaboration for years. I was the House of Justice member of liaison with the architect, designing and getting the properties and all the different stages. So we're old friends. And he had some business down there, so he came down the same time I was there. I was there teaching at the summer school, Chile summer school, just now, this last New Year's. And he said, we hired experts to ask in this kind of a building how many visitors we could expect a day on an average, so what we need to think about. And they came back after a careful study and they said, between 280 and 300 a day would. So he said, we made 9 toilets for women and 9 for men. The first year of the House of Worship in Chile, there were 600,000 visitors. Long lines outside the toilet houses. And no trees in the area either They quickly had to make additional parking lots down the mountain. There's terraces of more and more parking lots. The people were lined up. Sometimes they said they had days when there were 18,000 visitors in one day, a Sunday. Can you imagine? And they have a few little volunteer Baha'i youth trying to take care of everybody, like don't step on the plants, don't, line up here, go in the house of worship. You can be in there, it's 20 minutes for a program, and then you come out and so on. But that meant there were people all the time lined up on that long staircase. Well, it's thrilling. I talked to an Uber driver that I was there one day. I called an Uber, and he came up and he collected me. And he said, so did you visit the temple? I said, yes. He said, we live down below there, and we've watched it being built. I come with my family every week. He said, that house, that building, you go in that building, and you have new energy. And it creates hope in you. And the people are seeing that, they're knowing that. I said, yeah, it's thrilling. It's thrilling to me. I'm a Baha'i myself. And he says, you're a Baha'i? What do the Baha'is teach? He's going weekly to the house of worship, and he loves the spirit of the place, but he doesn't know what the Baha'is teach. And pretty much the 600,000 are in that condition. They're there. The city has 7 million, so they're hardly, it's hardly going to run out of visitors. There's a choir that sings regularly with the visitors when they come. They're just short but beautiful a cappella singing. As you may know, in the house of worship, there's no instrumentation. So it's a cappella choir. And I saw the choir, and it's so interesting. The choir has old people, middle of the, all the, like the rest of us, and children, all singing, and singing beautifully. All organized by a very talented choir leader, very spiritual-minded choir leader who writes some of the music. Nobody writes the words because the words are all from sacred scripture. But setting them to music is a special talent. When the House of Justice bought the land for the Chile temple, it knew the patch it wanted, but it was not able to buy that patch separate from 85 hectares. I don't know how many acres that is. What's that in acres? What?
250.
About 250 acres of land. It's a big plot of land. We ended up with 80 hectares. With the architect, he'd become friends with a neighbor there. And this man he's the owner of the copper fields in the north of the country. He had a very fancy place. We went to a breakfast that was more like a banquet than a breakfast. And he owns 80,000 hectares all around us. So we're trying to, stay friendly with him. And sometimes he takes the Baha'is out on horseback up into the mountains behind there. The people of Santiago are very appreciative of this house of worship. It's been advertised so much as being open to anyone to come there to pray and meditate, which is the very spirit of the Baha'i faith. And while I was there, the intendente, who's the mayor of mayors, he's the mayor on top of another 20 mayors that are regional, he's the head capo of the whole thing, presented awards in various sectors of public service and so on. And in the private sector, the award this year went to the Baha'i community for its contribution of this beautiful, and he spoke I was at the ceremony, and he spoke so beautifully about this contribution of the Baha'is and the spirit of that. Let that permeate the whole city. And now, friends, when you've never heard of the Baha'i faith and you hear about it, and you live in Chile, and there's nothing, you've never heard anything. Well, okay, the last 10 years you've been hearing things in the newspapers about this would-be temple. But suddenly the temple is a reality. And with it, the faith is a reality. It's like something happened to my wife and I. We're living up in the countryside outside of Sacramento. And the students at the high school, Granite Bay High School, it's quite a prestigious high school, they have the International Baccalaureate program. And one of the subjects of the International Baccalaureate that they choose and have to study is world religions. And very wisely, this original pattern includes the Baha'i faith as the latest of the world religions. So they have invited Baha'is to come and speak to the class. Then the class decided it would be good to have a panel of 5 major religions to speak about what's the purpose of life and what are the obstacles people are facing in fulfilling the purpose of the different religions. They invited us. I had spoken at the class, so they asked me if I would speak on behalf of the Baha'is. And when I first heard the program, they were going to do it in alphabetical order, which meant the Baha'is would speak first. And I thought, well, what are the rest of the people going to say if the Baha'is speak first? There was the Jewish, and the Christian, and the Buddhist, and the Muslim, and myself. Then they said, we decided to change it, and we were doing it in historic order. Oh, that was very good. So I had the last word on the subjects. Now, in a full evening like that, there wasn't much. I mean, we all spoke about 10 minutes, but it was so interesting because what they presented became the bouquet that I could gather together as the whole bouquet of We're all saying the same thing, aren't we? Why do we have these divisions amongst them? Why is it so much exclusive? And how can we possibly have more than one creator and sustainer? You know, Shoghi Effendi said it's a very low time in human history. We're at a very low point, the worst point that's ever been recorded that we have any knowledge of. I traveled with Mr. Olinga, Enoch Olinga, in South America for 3 months when I was still there as a pioneer and a member of the Board of Counselors. So I knew all the communities, and I took him around and translated his talks and so on. Mr. Olinga oftentimes would share the hours, long hours he had with Shoghi Effendi. He said, Shoghi Effendi, I was English speaking. There were English speaking pilgrims, but he put me in the Eastern Pilgrim House. And there were no Eastern pilgrims. So it was just me. And then he said, I'm sending Lutfullah Hakim to take care of you. Well, Lutfullah Hakim was one of the secretaries of the Guardian and became a member of the Universal House of Justice, the first Universal House of Justice as well. And then the Guardian would come up, because it was his custom to come and visit with whoever was in the Eastern Pilgrim House, go to the shrines with them. To the Westerners, he went to dinner with them. They were all invited to his dinner table, and he spoke to them there. But the Easterners he took to the shrines himself, and then he chanted the Tablet of Visitation. So Mr. Olinga said that in the course of his visit with Shoghi Effendi said that several times the Master was talking about the state of this planet. And he said it's the most backward planet of these planets that we know about. It's the hell of the planets, he said. Now, we know that one of the great principles of the Baha'i faith is that religious truth is relative and not absolute. Relative to our state of social evolution on this planet, this is the day of God, the great day of God, the coming of the kingdom of God on this planet. To this god-awful planet, as it turns out. And we're in this stage of adolescent rebellion against God that I should only imagine must be frightening if some of the other planets know what state we're in. I don't think that's why they're not visiting us every weekend. He also said there were planets with civilizations far, far superior to our own. Now we say, that's startling. That's a pilgrim note. It's a hearsay. Not too far away. The Guardian told Mr. Olinga, and he told me, so I felt pretty confident that it was a good source. And then I started thinking about it. You know, Baha'u'llah says that the universe is filled with fixed stars, he says. Okay? He says every fixed star has planets. And every planet has creatures whose number no man can compute. And there's a tablet of Abdul Baha that's coming out called the Tablet of the Universe, in which he mentions that there's no way to count the number of divine manifestations, messengers of God that appear to the worlds, throughout the worlds. So we get a very different picture. You know, we're coming along with our 5-year plan, and we're doing what we can. But there's a whole lot more to the universe than that. And Shoghi Effendi said in the future, the pendulum will swing. He said sometimes we get off, and when we get too far off in our understanding of things, then it starts to swing back again. But it goes past the moderation, goes the other way too far. He said that will happen with women's clothing, which have become less and less. And now they will become too much again, and then they will come back to a more moderate position in the future. I don't know. Hearsay also. But interesting. But then he said that's the problem now. It's a certain popular position, sounding educated and academic, to deny the existence of God. This is absurd. I mean, it's so absurd that people in the future, a couple hundred years from now, will scratch their heads about how, but how? Why would I mean, obviously we're created and there's a creator, and how can you deny that? Like, that's so absurd that nobody can even fathom it anymore. We're unfortunately living under terrific influence of materialism, and it taints our thinking about our Maker and our relationship to Him. I like spirituality, but I don't like religion. You hearing that these days? There's a lot of that around. How in the world did anything become spiritual without the messengers of God? There's a statement in the Gleanings, one of the tablets there, he says, all good comes from God, and all evil comes from your own selves. It's kind of challenging, but I think if you can turn that on its head and you say, no good comes from man individually. It all comes from God. If it all comes from God, any good that we manage to accomplish is because of the bounty of God. We have opened ourselves sufficiently to become a channel or an instrument for some goodness to be done. And it's his admonitions about being kind and about being loving and being embracive of all peoples that causes us to do the wonderful things that we think we've done. I remember leaving the Holy Land, I found a tablet after 37 years serving there. You know, you think, well, I'll go away with a few little prizes here. No. The tablet of the Master said, the service of the friends belongs to God, not to them. And he says it in several places like that. So we can never take pride. And anybody that does take pride in their services of the faith, he says they find themselves swept aside, unable, because that's not the attitude of humility and submissiveness that has to reign in us in order for this bounty of God to flow through us. So I think it needs a lot of thinking. The materialism, he said, has tainted us, it's changed us, it's made us apathetic, it's made us think how much, you know, where should the faith be in my life, and where should all the other things that I want to do be in my life? There's a marvelous letter from Shoghi Effendi. He describes the nature of sacrifice. He says there's 3 areas that the Baha'is need to be aware of to sacrifice. The first area, he said, is financial. You remember seeing writings where he says that to the degree that we sacrifice in contribution to the faith is the sign of how much we believe in it. Now, it's not easy if you watch, you contribute, and then you watch to see where the money is spent and decide, well, it's not being spent wisely, I'm not giving anymore. I think as far as I can understand this principle, friends, is that you give it even if they burn it at the other end. You give it because that's your bounty. What they do with it is their responsibility. The elected officials of the faith, your local assembly, your national assembly, the international institutions of the faith, okay. Usually we're not in a very good position to judge that or how it's being used. But there are annual reports. It's not a secret. They're supposed to report to us where things are being spent, how it's being spent. But apart from that, the attitude of giving, this wonderful law of hukuk that he's made so that you can feel you can manifest gratitude for existing, for him having created you, for him having sustained you. It's the place where Abdu'l-Baha says, it's the breath of the Holy Spirit gives you the power to reason and think. It isn't something that belongs to us. All of this, he's created the body, he's breathed life into us. What is it? So we can love and serve, love and worship. What happens? First sacrifice, financial. Then he said the second one, very difficult one, is the sacrifice of our time. We're called upon to spend time doing things that when we want to measure them and about, never mind, are they fun or interesting? They're onerous. We're sitting in committee meetings or in assembly meetings where people don't understand the faith well enough to make good sense out of the consultation, and you feel at the end of the evening, how have I spent my time, you know? There's also the choice of whether we're going to watch the latest TV show or we're going to try to take some step to teach the faith to somebody. It's always a challenge. Nothing wrong with TV, but it's a question of how much in your life, where are the balances, you know? Then he says the third one, which is even more surprising. He said it's the sacrifice of person, of your person, of your idea of who you are and what you want to do in life, that you have to give up some of. You have to cut back. You have to, but the role that he's calling to you is much better than anything you could design for yourself. That's the other point. We don't realize that as these sacrifices become more second nature in us, they're not sacrifices anymore. You hear people say, well, it's no sacrifice. It makes me happy, you know. I'm happy to do that. I mean, how exciting it is when you are able to convey something of the teachings of the faith to a person that responds positively and gets excited. It's like it renews your whole reason for being. You probably, like myself, have been interested in the near-death experience, the accounts of near-death experience. There's a scientist in Holland who's been studying thousands of these cases. What are the things in the different episodes that people who die and are gone, straight line, nothing left, no brain life at all, and then they come back again. And they've passed through, some of them, different phases, some just one or two phases, some more phases, some have seen quite elaborate experiences on the other side. So he interviews all these people and he says, what is the main thing you've brought back from that experience? And universally, the highest percentage says that I'm not afraid of death anymore. It's a beautiful thing. But I'd like to do something to deserve the things that we receive on the other side. And the second one, the second highest, is that the only thing that has any meaning is serving others. Helping others, serving others. Now, that's in our teachings too, but we don't quite, service to humanity. Or service to humanity is a big, vague phrase if it means, feeding the guy down on the corner or helping somebody out that's fallen and hurt themselves or whatever it is. There's so many rules now in our society, it makes it more and more difficult to help people. But they say that counts. In the life review, those are the significant moments when you've reached out and showed some kindness and maybe just a smile and a loving expression to someone, that can mean so much to somebody, can change their day. So just rise and always face everyone with a bright and friendly face. These challenges, it makes us think again, what's going to be the fruit of our existence? The Bob says the paradise that you go to is constructed of your good deeds. Okay, and now we know the good deeds aren't ours in any way, in any case, but if we've been the channel of, we've been able to act on behalf in accord with the teaching to some degree, then that creates the conditions in which we will reside on the other side. The mansions, the homes that we have now. I've been doing a lot of reading about immortality, and I'm going to probably exceed myself here talking to you a little bit about it, but we should understand the next world, there's nothing less than this world, much more than this world. That is, if you have government here, they have government there. If you have universities here, they have universities there. If you have sciences here, all of them originate in the other world. All the arts and science, everything is there in abundance. I talked to an old Persian pioneer. I was down in Australia, New Zealand, a couple of years ago. And he said, 3 of us, old guys, we're getting there ready to go to the next world. So we made a pact with each other that if one of us goes, he'll come back and tell us what's going on. And he says, one of us died last year. And we didn't hear anything. The two of us are saying, anything? No, nothing yet. Then he said, he came. I had a dream. I saw him. He said to me, I'm sorry. He said, I'm not allowed to speak about the next world. But the only thing I can tell you is it's very busy, which is the last thing we expect to hear from the other side. You know, we think of sitting in a cotton candy cloud and playing the harp or something. No, busy, busy, busy. And all the things we couldn't do, we'll get to do there, in the sense of accomplishments. And I don't think there's any reason. Abdu'l-Baha said he had a dream of one of the hands of the cause that had died, and he saw him. He said he was corpulent when he was here, and he was quite corpulent on the other side, he said too. And he was so happy, he said he'd just been in another district, diffusing the fragrances of God amongst the people. So, and Abdu'l-Baha says that's the term for teaching in the next world, that the teachers of the cause will continue to teach in the next world. And he said he liked it especially, he said, it mentions foods, there were new foods there, new things. Mostly, you know, we think, well, there's no food in the next world. You don't have a body here. What are you going to need food for, you know? You're going to feed a vapor? And we have such strange ideas about the next world. If this body, which Abdu'l-Baha says is the design of it, the structure of it all is a spiritual structure, it then draws to it prime matter and all kinds of things and builds the body that it needs to have its expression here. And he says that in the next world, we will have a body built of spiritual substance and we'll have the likeness. And at the first stages, the likeness is that we all recognize each other. It's interesting. I think that, you know, we don't go to a heaven for the entire universe. Single heaven. Everything's highly organized, you know. We go to the heaven of this planet and these creatures, and we go first amongst our family members that have gone ahead of us. And we meet them, and they come and greet us, and so on. And then we look back and we pray for the ones that are here that we know and we knew, but pretty soon they come over on the other side too. So there we have those, everybody who ever knew that's gone on, we're with them. And then all the ones we left behind, now they've come too. And there we are. And all of the great ones of history are there too. We don't know exactly how it works. Certainly Abdu'l-Baha says there's continuity of experience. There's not time in the sense that time is the means here because of the sun, and that we have this breakdown. You get old through time, but there you don't get time. You go young. A woman was so disturbed that her daughter had passed away, and she talks to Abdu'l-Baha, and Abdu'l-Baha assures her that she mustn't grieve, that it causes the daughter to be sad in the next world, that you're so sad that she's gone. She's being educated in the schools of the kingdom. You will meet her fully grown when you pass on in the next world. Any children we've ever lost, they will be there. Difficult for the people that have lost children for reasons that are not appropriate. I can only imagine them coming up and asking, why did you abort me? Why did you not let me live? You know, we don't think of the next world that way. We think it's going to be distant and nobody will know. But everything seems to be quite manifest as the day. All of our shortcomings and everything are there this way. I've been searching in the prayers to see if there's a prayer that doesn't ask for forgiveness and big mercy of God for the soul that's passed. So there's something reassuring to us that the soul actually, we all have to ask that forgiveness. It's part of the nature. We're not perfect here. I remember how pleased I was when I saw that in the Master's writing. It says, this is not a world of perfection, demonstration of perfections. I thought, yeah, I can fulfill that one. You know, we can all aim at that. I brought some papers along, which I was going to read a couple passages to you for, just as a kind of maybe cap off what we're talking about here tonight. In the last 2 years of his life, Shoghi Effendi wrote through his secretary several times about what were the keys to success, the steps that the Baha'is needed to follow in order to be effective in teaching. And he addressed several letters to different places, to individual believers and so on. And then he addressed one to the Hands of the Cause serving in the United States. I'm going to start with that one because it's the longest of them. And then I'll read the other ones, which just reinforce the pattern of what the steps he says. The beloved guardian has stressed over and over again that to effectively teach the faith, the individual must study deeply the divine word, imbibe its life-giving waters, and feast upon its glorious teachings. He should then meditate on the import of the word and, finding its spiritual depths, pray for guidance and assistance. But most important after prayer is action. After one has prayed and meditated, he must arise, relying fully on the guidance and confirmation of Baha'u'llah to teach his faith. Perseverance in action is essential, just as wisdom and audacity are necessary for effective teaching. The individual must sacrifice all things to this great goal, and then the victories will be won. These, friends, these are published. They're in the compilation of compilations, in different ones on teaching or on effective study. Success will crown the efforts of the friends on the home front when they meditate on the teachings, pray fervently for divine confirmations for their work, study the teachings so they may carry their spirit to the seeker, and then act and, above all, persevere in action. When these steps are followed and the teaching work carried on sacrificially and with devoted enthusiasm, the faith will spread rapidly. Another one, the keynote of success in the teaching field is study of the word, prayer, meditation, and then action. Above all, perseverance in action. When these steps are followed in the realm of self-sacrifice, success will be achieved. Pretty clear picture he's giving us here, you know. Prayer, meditation, study of the writings, and then act. And then act. Now we act and we run out of fuel because we're not, I don't want to say you're that way, but I have to be careful. If I don't load in studying the writings and trying to take the inspiration that comes from the hidden words and from the gleanings and from the Agon, if I don't not taking that in on a fairly regular basis, I run out of fuel. Then the action slows down. Perseverance in action. Bill Sears saw these letters, and he had a cartoonist make a drawing, and the drawing got circulated. And the picture was a small island in the sea with a single coconut tree on it, and a bedraggled couple with rags on under the tree, had just taken a bottle out of the sea, and they pulled a paper out of the bottle, a message in the bottle for them. They unfold the message, and the message says, persevere, Shoghi. Well, they said the Guardian had to laugh about that one too when he saw it. Well, that was the nature of the thing. You know, people would go out, Shoghi Effendi, I've gone here, I had a job, but I've lost the job, so I'm having to go back. What? He says, find another job. Sacrifice your level of living so that you can stay where you went. He never put it in a message, but he said it at the table. He said, we don't want the virgin golds lapsing back into virginity. Let those first Baha'is stay out there. And he said that many more Baha'is should have arisen to go out to open these golds during the 10-year crusade while he was still alive. He called for a veritable exodus from Southern California. Mrs. Mayberry came back and delivered that message to all of us. At that point I said, I got to go. I got to get up and go. Then I got told, the NSA said, no, but you're not even 21. You can't serve on an assembly. But do something on the home front. Then the Guardian died. I turned 21. I left. I left at that point. And meanwhile, Richard Merkovich from here had already gone pioneering before I got out of the country and was writing me burning letters about, what are you doing? You told me to do this, and I did it, and you're not out yet, you know, so. He was, yes, unforgiving in his encouragement to. Friends, we've talked about the sacrifice, we've talked about the perseverance, we've talked about these areas of sacrifice. I hope you'll look up these things and think about, there's so many other passages. I've got a whole slew of stage by stage for the 4 stages. Shoghi Effendi said, meditation is not the same as prayer. Prayer is one thing, meditation is another. It's not the same as study. It's taking time. Prayer, you're talking to God. You're asking something from God, usually. Okay, so like in any conversation, he says you should wait for an answer. You know, instead of that, we say, and don't forget to this. Thank you, God. Put the phone down. I was really surprised when I came back from the Holy Land. We'd say it's time for prayers, and people would take out their telephones. I said, wow, the American Baha'is have a direct line. Friends, a delight to be with you, and I don't know if anybody's got burning questions. I hope you don't have any burning questions. But if you have something that you'd like to ask about, we could entertain a few, unless, yeah, okay. But the secretary has to tell us if we have time. Can we? Sorry? Okay. Please. Yep. Please. Yeah.
I'm going to bring you a microphone. I'll be Vanna.
Thank you. You said the cab driver asked you what the Baha'is believe, or what do they teach. What did you tell him? The Uber driver.
Yeah. I don't know. Oh. I mean, that's the honest answer. I know I answered him, but I'm sure I said we believe in the oneness of mankind. That this house of worship represents that principle that everybody is welcome from every class of society, from every racial background, from every religious community. They're all welcome. And that we have to learn now, we have to come to see all of each other as one family. Maybe something about all the leaves of one tree. But you know, when you think about that, all the leaves of one tree, when we meditate, we really try to break these things down and think about them, you know. We are all being nurtured from one heavenly source. I remember Mr. Holly in a talk had said that, Hand of the Cause, Horace Holly said, that Baha'i unity is not a decision on the part of the Baha'is to put up with each other. You know, it's not, our unity is not, well, we got to get along, so we're just going to have to do it, you know. He said it's that we're drawn as Baha'is, deepening in the cause, we're drawn to the divine presence, and then we come in the presence of each other, and we see the light of God in each other. And that's the source of that's the unity. And Abdu'l-Baha said when Mrs. True was with her daughters, Corinne True, the Hand of the Cause, that was so active building the house of worship here in this country. Abdu'l-Baha said on their departure, she's recorded this in a booklet that she wrote about it. He said, I want you to see everyone that you meet, every soul that you meet, as a letter from your beloved. That letter may be soiled or torn or stained, but you don't fix attention on that, because you know inside that letter is some message from your beloved. And when you have a beloved, you're so eager to hear anything you can from him. And that's just this thing of meeting people and addressing the potential that they have, rather than whatever exterior presentation may be not very pleasant to look at or to talk to or whatever, but we have. And I think, you know, I hear Baha'is, and I've my own experience also, where people say that, I was attracted because you saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And this is very important if we can communicate that to people that we're talking to. Give them hope that they have this potential for the connection with their Creator. It's the only thing that has any meaning in this life. All the rest, he said, is reflections on water. Dust heap of a mortal world, which we're collecting to our great excitement. What's that? Please.
So we had a couple of more questions. You had your
Sorry, I wrote it down. So we've been talking quite a bit because this is one of the central principles of the faith, that we not involve ourselves in politics. But one of the things that I've been reflecting on is it seems like everything has been hijacked by politics. And so how do we reconcile wanting to help humanity when so many of the ways and means seem to be hijacked by politics? Mm-hmm. And it seems like there's not necessarily like an organized Baha'i response, and I don't know if we're at that level of maturity yet, but to a lot of the things that are happening within our society and culture. So what do we do?
In a sense, we're
It's kind of big.
caught up with the things that are happening around us too, and maybe we react a little too strongly. But Shoghi Effendi read 3 major newspapers, and he always clipped out the editorials. He was very well informed of the political activities of the world. He studied political science at Oxford. So it isn't that we're not keenly interested and aware, but we need to read a wide range of things so we understand different points of view, you know. I mean, when you think of the situation of the universities in the United States and the kind of things that are going on, we may soon be facing laws that say if you teach your child prayer, we'll take your child away from you. We're moving towards that kind of a society. Whether it'll all break down before we get there, I don't know. We've had it in Soviet Union. You would not teach your child to pray. That would be a terrible sin against the nation. Well, these are wicked things. They're wicked. I don't know. You know, we're talking about the nice things of the next world. There's also some There's things in the writings about, the avenging angels of God are waiting to throw you through the gates of hell. How about that? But, okay, we say we don't believe in heaven and hell as physical places, yes, fortunately. But have you ever been unhappy in a dream or scared in a dream? It's not a physical place, but you can have feelings quite independent of your body, Excuse me, somebody had a mic.
I have a question about the the 2% receptivity. I know that I remember reading in the writings that I believe the Guardian or other writings said that receptivity will increase. Have there been any latest numbers out on it? Can we hope for 10% now, maybe?
Yeah,
I don't know.
that would
Just
be
so
nice.
we can, I don't know.
Maybe you'll be affected with 10%, say your prayers and go forward. I think, we don't have a guardian around to say what percentage, and I don't know, as House of Justice isn't in a position to make that kind of a prediction. But they say, the waiting souls, just a comment from a tablet of Abdu'l-Baha, he says that people are in different conditions. Some of the people, he said, are like oil, that the minute a spark touches it, it flames up. Faith awakens. Then he said, some are like green branches, and you have to take the branch and put it in the fire. And when it's in the fire, it sputters and makes noise and pops, and until it gets dried out, and then it finally catches fire. We've all had teaching experiences like that, I'm sure. And then he said, others are like stones, like black stones, he said. You bring them near the fire, they warm up, and they stay warm. But when they're not near the fire, they cool off again. So those kind of people you want to try to keep in association, in activity, so that they remain attracted. Now, that doesn't mean that people's capacity can't change. Capacity is not a fixed thing. And through the bounties and grace of God, potentialities that we didn't understand in ourselves can come alive.
Hi, I had one question. Now, after that lady talk, I have two questions. I think, if I understand correctly, that you were asking when we are hijacked by political things, how do we give the answers? Is that what you were saying?
No.
Or I'm thinking of a different line again.
I think so. I was just curious about, for example, with the problems we've had with gun violence in schools,
Right.
and a lot of these nonviolent protests have been actually very political. And so, as of myself, I felt that I can't participate in something like that. But this is just a small example. But how do we, when the responses to things that are happening in the world are very political in nature, how do we formulate responses? That was kind of my question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still stuck at that one, exactly what I heard, because things are happening, and say about, for example, the rifles having or not having, and, the killings, whatever is the subject. We hopefully understand what the Baha'i faith says on these subjects. But when we are approached by people who are not Baha'is, how can we, besides saying that the fundamental has to change and this and that, they want some tangible answers, or I don't know how to say this. What is it that we can do or say to them?
Yeah, I'm trying to hint at that it's so materialistically oriented that it's very hard to come up with answers that are satisfying to them, because they want you to go out and help. They want you to be an activist. Mm-hmm. Now, our activity is the supreme activity, Abdu'l-Baha says, is that you touch someone with the spirit of the faith. In the divine plan, he doesn't say distribute pamphlets, pass out information. What does he say? Breathe life into the souls of others. And then he says, how can the poor give to the poor? You have to enrich yourself first spiritually so that you have some breath that'll affect the people. But basically, that's the long-term solution, because they change the nature of the people and they want to act, they want to do good things. They don't want to push their party politics. They want to do good things. They want to be kind to people. They want peace to be established in the world. All the things get solved once we move in that direction, you know. And I think Baha'u'llah is causing souls that are being born, the new generations. For instance, the oneness of mankind is becoming much more ordinary. In the 50s, we talked about the oneness of mankind. People would say, that's a utopia, that's totally impossible. But now the youth demonstrate it. And in schools, they don't have so much of these divisions like we used to have. Social maybe, but racial and religious-wise, it's all coming loose so that it can come back together in a new way. It can, there's a principle. Prigozhin, this scientist, Russian scientist, Irving Laszlo, the lunch I had with him in San Francisco in 1995 at a peace conference that we had, he was saying, I was quoting Baha'u'llah saying about the vibrating influence of this New World Order, you know. And he listened to that and he said, what year was that Baha'u'llah said that? I said, about 1870. He said, that's 50 years before Prigozhin discovered this thing of dissipative structures. That is, you have an order of some sort. And it happens, he discovered it at the chemical level in the body, that there's a stable balance between the elements. For instance, the traffic patterns in Costa Mesa, which the roads were designed for a certain number of cars. So it functioned at that level. But as you introduce more cars and more cars and more cars and more cars and more cars, that stability in this order of things is disturbed. Now, Prigozhin said two things happen at a chemical level. One is that the old order absorbs the new elements, adjusts to them and uses them, and things go forward. The other is that the influence of the new is so strong that the order comes apart completely. Only to then, after that, reestablish it in a new order. So this is what we're talking about. The old order is being rolled up, and a new order being unrolled in the world. So it's happening simultaneously. This is very mysterious, but this is why we need to read particularly the Guardian's letters. By the way, the NSA has sent to all the summer schools that the content of the summer schools this year should be the writings of Shoghi Effendi. This is years we haven't heard anything like that, so I was quite enthusiastic of having been grounded in those, especially the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. We all want to be reading that and reading it over and over again. It animates our vision, the clarity of our understanding of the essential verities of the faith, which is the whole purpose in statements of the House of Justice, why we have the Institute process. The Institute process is to teach us essential verities of the cause. It was established because there was no deepening of the new masses of people coming into the faith. We needed some program that would ground them in the faith. It was not made for non-Baha'is. It was for Baha'is. Now, there's been modification in a sense, and now non-Baha'is are in it. But I think we have to be careful when people who are not believers yet are taking the courses to explain that this is written for Baha'is, for new Baha'is that don't have a sound knowledge of the faith. There's nothing secret about it. You're welcome to see it. You're welcome to take part in it. You're welcome to participate in acts of service. But they need to know that, otherwise it sounds like, we're proselytizing them. When you get into Book 2, there's such strong emphasis on what you have to do and what you have to believe. They say, well, I'm not a Baha'i, I don't know how to do this, So it's good to kind of, if you're bringing non-Baha'is into it, explain that this, you're welcome to come to this. This is what the activity we have going on right now, and you're welcome to come. But realize that it's, directed to people who've said they want to be Baha'is, they want to understand it.
Mr. Dunbar, could you share with us some of your recollections of Dr. Giacari?
Dr. Giacari, he was such a noble man, carried himself so well. He was a Sicilian count, actually. He's of the royal blood of Europe, and his wife is one of the royalty of Sweden, of the royal family. Quite, we don't like that kind of thing in America very much, or we do, but we don't make much of it. But they were so refined. Obviously, he was a chemist. He was a doctor of chemistry. He came while I was in Bluefields in Nicaragua, which is a sleepy little jungle town in Nicaragua on the Atlantic side, on the Caribbean side of Nicaragua. He came, he was there for 3 days. From the moment he landed in a DC-3 in the strip of mud that they called the airport, he was noticing all the varieties of plants, the nature of the structures of the houses. It was so fascinating. He was interested in everything. And then he would turn to talking about Shoghi Effendi. Now, if you haven't had the privilege of reading his memories about his working with Shoghi Effendi, I urge you to try to get that. It's Dr. Giacari's book about Shoghi Effendi. I think that's the title is, what is it? Remembrance of Shoghi Effendi or something. I'm sorry. Recollections? Thank you. His English was not completely cooked yet. He had an Italian accent, and he'd lived in America for some time, but I remember he said, "How can I tell you how much Shoghi Effendi loved me?" Now, I had to, you hear that in English and you say, what? Then you say, okay, let's interpret this. And really what it was is, I can't tell you how loving Shoghi Effendi was to me. It's what he was saying, He was so kind, he said. He was so loving to me, so encouraging. I heard that he was in charge, of the milling and mining of all the marble that's used on the Shrine of the Bab, and then also for the archives. That was all done in collaboration with Shoghi Effendi. Shoghi Effendi named Dr. Giacari a member of the International Council, which before it was an elected body. He was on it. He named him a hand of the cause. He was a member at large. In other words, he functioned outside the Holy Land, but he was a member of the council. And I heard years later from some of the friends, Masood Kamsi, for instance, had known that, and we learned that, I heard it from Ruhia Khanum herself, that the only people that Shoghi Effendi ever met, Baha'is that he met outside the Holy Land, were the Giacaris. When he'd go to Rome for business, they'd have to discuss the question of the marbles and things. They had gone to a certain restaurant where the Baha'is knew where the table was and where they had sat and everything like that. They were all excited about that. Because Shoghi Effendi didn't meet the friends outside the Holy Land. He didn't feel it was fair to meet some and not meet others. So generally, when some eager Baha'is would spot Shoghi Effendi with Ruhia Khanum, they'd start coming towards them. Ruhia Khanum said Shoghi Effendi would look in a window and I would go and stop the Baha'is and tell them, he doesn't want to meet the Baha'is outside the Holy Land. Come on pilgrimage. Welcome. Dr. Giacari, Mrs. Mayberry told me, she served on the teaching center too. She said, I was at the table and the Guardian started speaking about Dr. Giacari. He said, Dr. Giacari is 1,000 men. Dr. Giacari is almost a saint. He said he started to say he's a saint, and then he caught himself. He said, almost a saint. I mean, still alive after all, with all the pitfalls of this world. But he really was a very saintly man. He was a radiant man. Those 3 days, after that, I was, I'd been an actor, a film actor and everything, so I just was imitating him. The position of his hands, the way he walked. For days after he left, I'm sure I should have modeled myself after the spiritual part, but What a blessed man, really. They had a son that died, he told me, that died in childhood. Just a couple of years old, and it was so sad for them. But he said he would have been 18 in 1940. And you know what, 1940 was the beginning of the wars, and they were in Italy, and Mussolini, and the whole, he said he undoubtedly would have been conscripted and been a soldier and been in that war. So he said that maybe that was the wisdom of him having gone ahead.
Sorry. My question was, you mentioned about distancing, you noticed about distancing from the Baha'i writings, reading them, understanding them, deepening, which I have noticed also for a long time. And if you, the focus has been on Ruhis all the time. And basically, if you don't do Ruhi when there's something must be wrong with you, or, it's an unspoken rule there. Anyway, my concern wasn't about adults. My concern is about children and youth. They are the junior youth classes, the other classes, Ruhi classes, all that is wonderful for the children. But I have noticed as the year goes by, these children, these youth have no idea about the history of the Baha'i faith, about a lot of things that they should know. If they don't learn anything at all in their own family background, then they're not picking up a book to read and see what's going on. And quite honest with you, the children classes were, in my opinion, were more effective than some of the, the Ruhi classes for children. I think the two together should somehow combine, because you can't have a child, after a while, if the Ruhi things are not with the child just says, oh, I'm a Baha'i. When they ask, why are you Baha'i, or what is, can you tell me just 3 sentences about Baha'u'llah's life and this and that, they have no clue, they have no idea. And this is getting worse and worse and worse for the past 10 years as I observe it. So I'm kind of wondering about that.
Well, I think that we had regional Baha'i schools. We had more regular summer school courses, longer summer school courses in the past. People don't have the time now, the work pressures and so on, so somehow that's gotten shrunk. Now we have weekends at Bosch or something, 3-day weekends at Bosch. We used to go for 2 weeks at a time. There were 3 sessions, 2-week sessions in the summer. And the youth would go, and they had teachers that would teach the Agon and some answered questions, and the Dawnbreakers. Friends, these are essential books to master. Shoghi Effendi says, master. What does master mean? I mean, we should be able to repeat it effectively, truthfully, what they contain. It's a big deal. The National Assembly of the United States wrote, and they said that members of committees of the regional children's classes, there were classes, where maybe 4 or 5 communities would come together, and they'd have classes of different levels for the different children in the past. And they were told at a certain point to disband these, that you have to follow the Ruhi books and don't do anything else. They complained to the NSA, what's this? is this the House of Justice or is this somebody's idea? They wrote the House of Justice about it. I was there at the time. The House of Justice answered and said, we've never said that they should be disbanded. So I tell you that because maybe they'll start up again. Some places they're starting again, but they were so discouraged that they were, implied that maybe they weren't obeying the covenant, and I don't know. Yeah, friends, these things have to kind of smooth out. It's a challenge, but I can tell you that there's no letter ever said no study classes, no letter ever said no firesides, and no letter ever said no intercommunity classes. But there's lots of letters that say do the Ruhi book. So, like you say, both things should be going on at the same time. It's just, we don't, do we have time for everything or don't? That's the other thing. That's the argument that'll come back at you. Well, there's not time to do all those things and still do the other things. But we need to try to balance it all out.
My question is kind of different from all the other questions. I know my responsibilities as a Baha'i, but the definitions of responsibilities from Baha'i administration should also exist. I'm going to give an example. Let's say I write a blog and I put down, is there any remover of difficulties? Is a prayer I like a lot. This was written by the Bab. And then I get an assembly approach me and say, no, you got it wrong. That's written by Baha'u'llah. And I know it was written by the Bab. But they insist, no, it's written by Baha'u'llah. So I write to the House of Justice. And the House of Justice says, yeah, it's written by the Bab. But then again, the assembly does not accept it. It says, no. So what does a person do? As a Baha'i, what do I do? Do I hold this as poison in myself? Where does a Baha'i go?
Spread your efforts out. Don't fix just on that one thing. I'm sure you're thinking about other things. It's an example. Yeah, sometimes they get it wrong. Patience, and we have to be kind, and we have to be as understanding as we can. We have to be kind and understanding as we can, because that's just we're all full of foibles. It doesn't come to anything much. We know the Bab wrote it, okay, but if somebody says Baha'u'llah did it. The other thing is in Firesides, where Baha'is will contradict the speaker because they think they understand something better than the speaker. Let the speaker say whatever they want. Don't contradict, because it creates a bad spirit in the meeting. Talk to them afterwards if you want, but never criticize, Tonight you've all been so kind and not criticized anything I've said. I don't know what to tell you on that one. But I do understand myself that the Bab seems to have written that prayer. Yeah, no, I understand. I understand.
I'm 100% sure of something being correct, and the insistence is there, but no, this is wrong.
Okay, that's not going to get resolved right tonight in this meeting. I think we should let that one go.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other questions? A comment. Oh, a comment. Let's try to stick it with questions.
The comment was that to be wrong but united is better than be right but disunited. That's from
Yep. That takes a certain modesty, moderation, patience, and understanding. An assembly decides to do something, you say, this is very crazy. But you have to support the assembly decision. And then Abdullah says, if there's unity and support of the decisions, then the right will be made wrong. It will become clear. So there's some course correction that goes on in the way we apply the things that we're told to do. And that, gradually we're learning. Thank you very much, friends.